He made me sign a fiancé contract, with one cruel clause. If either of us betrayed the other, they'd lose everything. I kept every promise. He broke every one. And when he kissed his campaign manager, I walked away, with the evidence, the donors, and his political future in my pocket. Now I'm marrying the man he once called my shadow, the one who always stood beside me, and never behind. The contract was Andrew's idea. He presented it with that smug, rehearsed charm of his, sliding it across the table like a birthday gift. Just a formality, Mats. You know how messy things can get at this level. At this level. As if we weren't already co-headlining every financial magazine in New York. As if our engagement hadn't already been plastered across every business gossip blog from Manhattan to DC. As if I needed him more than he needed me. Still, I smiled politely. You want me to sign a contract before our wedding? It's not about trust, he said smoothly, pouring me a glass of Pinot. It's about clarity. My advisors say it helps. Less emotional fallout. Fewer headlines. That kind of clarity. I flipped through the pages silently. It wasn't a prenup, not exactly. That had already been signed and notarized last year. This was something else. Something colder. Clause 1. No public emotional outbursts. Clause 4. Media statements must be coordinated. Clause 11. Appearances at political or campaign events are mandatory unless otherwise agreed. Clause 17. Mutual respect in public and private. Clause 26. Breach of any clause gives the injured party discretion to dissolve the engagement without consultation. How romantic, I said dryly. He laughed like I'd told a joke. Come on, you're the queen of contracts. Publishing, mergers, all that. This is nothing. Yes, nothing. Just a little document dictating what kind of woman I had to be to stand next to Andrew Pierce. I signed it. Not because I believed in it, but because I already knew I wouldn't need it. I had loved him. Stupidly, patiently. For 4 years. And I thought he'd grown into something solid. Dependable. The contract wasn't protection for me, it was proof. That if he ever did what I feared he might, I would have the power to walk. Quietly. Wiggly. Without needing to justify anything to anyone. 2 weeks later, I was at my desk in the Cole and Eastman Publishing House's upper suite, finalizing a new acquisition from a debut novelist when the email came. No subject line. No message. Just a photo. Sienna. Kissing. It was taken from an angle that only someone close could have captured, behind tinted glass in what looked like a black car. Her hand rested against his jaw. His lips on hers. I didn't blink. I didn't even react. Instead, I opened the drawer, pulled out the original engagement agreement, and flipped straight to the clause I already knew by heart. Clause 17. Mutual respect. In public and private. It didn't matter what his excuse would be. It didn't matter if it was a dare, a bet, a misunderstanding. It didn't matter if he said it was for the optics of a campaign narrative. A breach was a breach. I called him. He picked up on the third ring. Hey babe, he said breezily. Can I call you back? We're just... Did you read Clause 17? I asked. Pause. What? Clause 17. Of the contract you made me sign. He hesitated. Madeline, come on. You're not seriously. You kissed Sienna. It's not like that, he snapped. It's part of the campaign. People are speculating about us and she's polling well with independents. It's a narrative angle. She's not your press agent, Andrew. She's your ex. Exactly. The public loves exes reuniting. It's relatable. I felt a flicker of disgust rise up. So you're saying this was scripted? I'm saying it's strategy. You signed up for this when you agreed to stand by my side. I signed a clause about respect. You broke it. He paused again and I heard the faint rustle of movement. I imagined him glancing at the contract, wondering how tightly I'd hold him to it. Madeline, he said in that careful, composed tone he used with donors. Don't overreact. We're 2 weeks out from the wedding. This would be catastrophic. I was silent. His voice hardened. Don't do something you'll regret. I won't, I said. Then added flatly, Clause 26. I can dissolve the engagement without your input. This isn't one of your manuscripts, he snapped. You can't just rewrite the story to fit your mood. No, I agreed. But I can change the ending. And I hung up. The rest of the day passed in ice. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone, except one person. My father. It rang once. "Madeline," he said, his voice warm with surprise. "How's my girl?" "About the alliance," I said. "The one you mentioned years ago." "I'm ready." He went quiet. "Are you sure?" "If I feel the same tomorrow," I replied calmly, "we'll go through with it." He paused again, then said, "Good. I always said Andrew wasn't right for you. I needed to see it for myself. I'll begin making arrangements. You just say the word." I nodded even though he couldn't see it. After I hung up, I stared at the contract one last time. Then I folded it neatly and slid it back into the drawer, next to the torn envelope that had delivered Andrew's photo. Not every disaster is loud. Some come softly. But when the storm does come, I've learned to walk right through it. Umbrella closed, eyes forward. By the time the news broke, I was already 3 steps ahead. Breaking. Andrew Pierce announces engagement, pause, amid personal turmoil. Sources suggest fiancé's emotional state, complicated political landscape. Rumored rift in power couple, Sienna Lowe steps in? I stared at the glowing screen of my phone with a strange, almost detached calm. The photos were perfectly orchestrated. Andrew in his navy blue suit, smiling sadly. Sienna just behind him, demure, supportive, and irritatingly camera-ready. I tapped into the live stream of the press conference already in progress. "Taking this time to support Madeline as she navigates the pressure," Andrew said gravely, "and because I believe mental wellness must always come first, even before political momentum." So I was now fragile. Interesting tactic. He was trying to own the narrative before I could speak. Or maybe he assumed I wouldn't speak at all. He wasn't wrong. Clause 4. All statements to media must be coordinated and pre-approved. Well, that clause didn't apply anymore. But I wasn't going to offer a rebuttal either. I didn't need to. I just needed to move. Quietly. Cleanly. Lethally. I didn't post. I didn't tweet. I didn't pick up calls from reporters or board members asking, "Is it true?" Instead, I called my attorney and said, "Update the prenup. Andrew's name comes off everything. I want it done within 48 hours. "Understood," she said, not asking why. Then I walked into the event planning team's weekly meeting, held every Tuesday in the glass conference room at Cole and Eastman headquarters. They were reviewing floral arrangements for what would have been my bridal shower. I stood at the head of the table. "Cancel the shower," I said simply. "Cancel the venue. Refund the vendors. Send personal thank you notes to every guest on my behalf." They stared. Melissa, my executive coordinator, blinked twice and asked carefully, "Should I ask for a rescheduled date?" "No," I said, my voice perfectly even. "You won't be planning Andrew's wedding." By that evening, the second round of stories hit the news cycle. Insiders say Madeline Cole cancels all wedding events without a statement. Sienna Lowe joins Andrew Pierce at back-to-back fundraisers. "We're just supporting each other," says Sienna, wearing a ring. I watched the world chew on the spectacle. Andrew and Sienna had crafted their play well. Whisper the word "breakdown," then give the public something shinier to distract them. Like a perfect little scandalous rebound. The headlines weren't subtle. But I had no intention of playing victim. The next call I made was to my father. He picked up on the first ring this time. "So," he said, "we're really doing this?" "Yes," I said simply. "Let's draft the new contract." A long pause. Then, "Are you sure about the groom?" I closed my eyes for a moment. There was only one name. "Christian Vale," I said. Another pause, this time longer. My father's voice lowered. "You know that will provoke Andrew more than anything else." "Good," I replied. He gave a small, thoughtful laugh. "I always knew you had your mother's cold steel in you." She called it clarity. "And she was right," he said. "I'll speak to Christian." Christian Vale was not the kind of man you kept on a leash. He was discreet, calculating, and dangerous in a courtroom. He also happened to be Andrew's older cousin. Where Andrew had smiles, Christian had silence. Where Andrew needed crowds, Christian needed strategy. Where Andrew kissed ex-girlfriends in campaign vans, Christian didn't even date. We had met years ago at a shareholders' retreat, when I was 23 and Christian was 31. I remembered the moment clearly because I had just shut down a merger pitch from a man twice my age, and Christian had watched the entire exchange without saying a word. Later that evening he'd passed me at the bar and said simply, "You were correct. His valuation math was off by 1.7 million. Then walked away. He had remembered that figure from a conversation he wasn't part of. My father trusted Christian more than anyone in legal affairs. He had once said, "He never plays politics, he just wins." I didn't wait for him to call me. I dialed him directly. He answered on the second ring. "Christian Vale." "Madeline Cole," I said. "I'm sure my father already briefed you." He did. I could practically hear his chair creak as he leaned back. "And your thoughts?" I asked. There was a pause, then, "I think it's bold." "That's not a no." "No, it's not." I stood by my window watching the sun disappear behind the skyline. "I don't care about optics, Christian. This isn't revenge. This is strategic replacement." Another pause. "And you think I'm the right candidate? You're unmarried. High net worth. Legally spotless. Loyal to my father. And most importantly," I glanced toward the untouched wedding ring box still on my shelf, "you're not Andrew." He let out the faintest laugh. "You're not romantic, Madeline." "I'm not foolish." "You always did terrify the boardroom," he said quietly. "I need a public fiancé," I replied. "Temporary. You can draw up the expiration clause yourself." He paused. "You think I'll say yes because I respect your father?" "No," I said. "You'll say yes because you hate losing." After the call, I went to the fireplace in my apartment and dropped the signed Pierce engagement contract into the flames. I watched Clause 17 curl and vanish in red gold embers. "Goodbye, Andrew. Enjoy the cameras. You'll need them more than ever." The invitation arrived on heavy ivory cardstock, edged in gold, delivered by hand. The Langford Institute's Centennial Gala. Friday, 7:30 p.m. Waldorf Grand Ballroom, Manhattan. It wasn't just a social event. It was the social event, an annual convergence of old money, new power, and media buzz. The kind of gala where appearances spoke louder than words and absences became headlines. Last year, Andrew and I had walked in hand, dazzling photographers and drawing whispers of the next political dynasty. This year I walked in alone. A hush fell the moment I stepped through the ballroom doors. Not because of what I wore, but because I dared to show up at all. The gown was midnight blue velvet. Sleek, architectural, unapologetic. I wore no necklace, only a pair of antique sapphire earrings and my mother's ring on my right hand. No sign of an engagement band. The press pit near the grand staircase lit up with the soft whir of cameras. "Madeline Cole. Over here, can you look this way?" I turned my head slowly, just enough for one shot. Then I walked past them without pausing. Inside, champagne flutes sparkled, violins played faintly from the balcony, and the chatter buzzed, controlled, deliberate. I felt it instantly, the pivot. The power dynamic had shifted and they were waiting to see what I would do next. Some nodded politely. Others didn't bother hiding their curiosity. Where was Andrew? Why was I here? Was I trying to make a point? They had no idea how big of a point I was about to make. I circled the room like a queen surveying her battlefield. Each corner held whispers of scandal. I passed campaign donors, publishing rivals, and socialites whose pearls practically vibrated with gossip. And then the murmuring began. Not about me, but about the man who had just stepped through the door behind me. I didn't have to turn to know it was him. Christian Vale. He walked with quiet assurance, dressed in a black tailored tuxedo sharp as a blade. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes scanned the room with practiced precision. And when they landed on me, he smiled. It wasn't wide or charming. It was quiet. Intentional. He crossed the room in long strides and stopped beside me, gently placing a hand on my lower back like we'd done this 100 times before. "Sorry I'm late," he murmured just for me. I tilted my head slightly. Perfect timing. The room froze. Christian's voice, louder now, said calmly, "Allow me to reintroduce Miss Madeline Cole." Heads turned. "This is my future wife." There was a gasp. Audible. And immediate. Christian extended his arm and I rested my fingers on it like it was always meant to be that way. Flashes erupted behind us as cameras went off in rapid fire. The press, the board members, the donors, every single one of them saw it. Andrew's replacement had arrived. And it wasn't just anyone. It was his cousin. From across the room I saw them. Andrew and Sienna. She wore crimson. Predictable. Her dress was tight and sparkled under the chandelier. His expression, however, was less polished. His smile faltered. His hand dropped from Sienna's elbow. He watched Christian and me like we just detonated something under his feet. He wasn't wrong. I met Andrew's eyes and didn't look away. Sienna tried to cover it with a smile. Too late, too forced. Christian leaned in and whispered, satisfied. Almost. By midnight the gala had reached peak drama. The ballroom buzzed with speculation. The society pages were already drafting headlines from the moment Christian said future wife. Even the orchestra had paused. At one point, a reporter tried to corner me near the champagne tower. Miss Cole, are we to understand the engagement with Andrew Pierce is officially off? Yes, I said without blinking. And your new fiancé, Mr. Vale, is that a rebound or? I raised a single brow. Do I look like someone who rebounds? He shrank back instantly. Christian, who had just returned with 2 drinks, handed me a glass without a word. The gesture was so seamless, so practiced, it gave everyone the exact impression I wanted them to have. We weren't new. We were inevitable. I found myself near the terrace when she approached me. Eleanor Pierce. Andrew's mother. Impeccably dressed in emerald silk, her diamonds cold and heavy against her throat. She moved like a queen even when cornered. Madeline, she said, her voice clipped. May I speak with you privately? I nodded once. Of course. We stepped outside. The terrace was quiet, the air crisp with early spring chill. She turned to face me, the facade of control cracking just slightly around her eyes. I've always respected you, she began. You're intelligent. Composed. A good match. I said nothing. But this is cruel, Madeline. Do you know what this looks like? I know exactly what it looks like, I replied coolly. Her nostrils flared. Andrew made a mistake, yes. But to parade Christian in front of everyone, his own cousin, it's humiliating. Vindictive. You're punishing him publicly. I sipped my drink. I never mentioned Andrew. Christian introduced me. You know what people will say. I'm counting on it. She frowned. You can't marry Christian. You were engaged to Andrew. Our families had a contract, I interrupted. And your son breached it. Her mouth opened. Closed. That doesn't justify. He wrote the rules, I said sharply. Clause 17. Mutual respect. He violated it. People stray. Then people lose me. She stepped closer, her voice softening. Madeline, you'll destroy him. You still have time to stop this. I looked her in the eye. Then he shouldn't have breached the clause. She stared at me for a long moment. Then turned and walked away without another word. I stood there on the terrace, finishing my champagne as the city glittered below. Andrew wanted to play politics. I had just shown him how real power moved. By the next morning, the media had gone into a frenzy. New York heiress Madeline Cole engaged again? Enter Christian Vale, the silent power behind the family throne. Cole's cold move or strategic genius. Sources say Christian and Madeline might have history. Pierce family stunned. Sources say former fiancé had no warning. I received 17 interview requests, 5 invitation-only talk show pitches, and 1 email from Vogue asking if I'd pose for a new era bridal cover. I declined all of them. Instead, I sent a handwritten letter to my media team. The Cole family does not issue statements to validate truth. Let the silence speak. Later that day, Christian called. Do you regret it? He asked simply. Not a second of it. There was a pause. Well, he said finally, then I suppose you should know. Andrew just tried to fire me from the Pierce Estate Advisory Board. I laughed. Let me guess. He forgot your contract was written by me. Exactly. Clause 5. Tenure is fixed unless both parties agree. Christian's voice was rich with amusement. You really are ruthless. No, I replied. I'm precise. The first domino fell on a Thursday. Andrew Pierce appeared on a daytime news panel, charming as ever, spinning the scandal with the finesse of a seasoned politician. It's not uncommon, he said, for powerful relationships to go through changes. Madeline and I are simply reevaluating. He wore his sympathy like a tailored suit. But just beneath his confident tone, the cracks were starting to show. Because while he was busy smoothing out his public image, I was busy rewriting the foundation of our shared empire. By noon that same day, an internal press release was issued to Cole and Eastman's board. Effective immediately, all joint holdings previously split between Madeline Cole and Andrew Pierce shall be reassigned. Ms. Cole will now retain full executive control over her shares and an additional 15% previously allocated as engagement security. In total, I now owned 40% of the company. The board approved it without a whisper of resistance. They remembered whose name came first in the company title. That night, I sat in the boardroom with my attorney and 2 witnesses, watching as the final signatures were inked onto the redistribution agreement. "Will he contest?" my lawyer asked. I shook my head. He doesn't have the leverage anymore. He's too busy keeping his campaign afloat. And that was the second domino. By Friday, the whispers turned into headlines. Madeline Cole quietly reclaims publishing power. Andrew Pierce loses 15% stake. Investors back Cole move. We trust her vision. Campaign donors began to panic. My name had been part of Andrew's political narrative from the beginning. Publishing royalty meets political prodigy. It had been the glossy romance angle that made his stiff policies palatable. Now that story was broken. And with it so was the illusion of control. Several major contributors pulled out within 48 hours. A few offered to redirect their funds to education causes, coincidentally run by foundations that I chaired. Sienna tried to step into the void. I could see her in news clips, smiling too brightly next to Andrew at town halls, attempting to inject herself into interviews. But her voice, once coddled in backroom campaign strategy meetings, was now conspicuously absent. I didn't need to ban her. Men like Andrew collapse their own kingdoms when no one's watching. It was at the Literary Vanguard Awards that the next play unfolded. It wasn't a political event. It was my turf. And that's what made it perfect. Christian was scheduled to attend as a silent partner. We had arranged for subtlety, but sometimes subtlety gets eclipsed by opportunity. I stepped onto the stage mid-ceremony to present the final award of the evening, Best Nonfiction Debut. I wore pearl white with a silk cape and silver heels that echoed with every step. In the audience, the publishing elite watched me with fascination. They all knew I was no longer Andrew's fiancée. They didn't know what I was going to do next. After presenting the award, I turned to the podium once more. "There's one more honor I'd like to give tonight," I said clearly. "It's not official. But it's long overdue." From the table closest to the front, Christian stood slowly as cameras began flashing. I walked toward him. In my hands was a first edition volume, bound in navy leather and gold leaf. The title, custom printed, read, "Loyalty That Won." I handed it to him, looked him in the eye and said, "You've always written the footnotes to my victories. I think it's time your name was in the headline." He bowed slightly, then without hesitation, kissed me. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't safe. It was bold, deliberate, and devastatingly effective. The room erupted in applause. By the time we reached the after-party, social media had exploded. #Madeline and Christian. Publishing heiress turns power play into love story. Christian Vale, the quiet king beside the throne. Even Vulture ran a piece titled, "When Revenge Wears Couture and Smiles in Latin." I knew Andrew saw it. Because at precisely 12:47 a.m., I received a text from him. "We need to talk. In private. Just us." I stared at it for 10 seconds, then replied, "Tomorrow. 3 p.m. boardroom. Bring your dignity. I'll bring my lawyer." The next afternoon I arrived 3 minutes early. Andrew was already waiting. He had ditched the campaign blazer and wore a button-down shirt rolled up at the sleeves, trying to look casual, wounded, approachable. "I thought we agreed, just the 2 of us," he said as my attorney took a seat beside me. "I no longer agree to anything you say," I replied flatly. He inhaled sharply. "Fine." He looked thinner than usual. Less composed. "You've made your point," he said. "But this is overkill. You know the press sees this as a personal vendetta. You made me look like a fool." "No," I said. "You did that when you kissed Sienna and blamed my emotional state to cover it." He flinched. "I've lost 4 major sponsors," he said. And half my digital team is threatening to quit. I waited. So tell me what you want, Madeline. My smile was razor thin. That's the problem, Andrew. You still think I want something from you. He blinked. Then why drag this out? Why humiliate me? You humiliated yourself. I made one mistake. You made a choice, I corrected. And now I've made mine. I reached into my bag and slid a small, unlabeled USB drive across the table. He stared at it, frowning. What's this? Exhibit A, I said. My attorney added, campaign violations. Unreported donations. Unethical coordination between your finance director and a PAC you claim to have no ties to. Andrew's face paled. We have emails, calls, even a rough timeline, I added. His voice was hoarse. Why would you do this? Because, Andrew, I leaned forward, you made me sign a contract with 26 clauses, and you broke the one that mattered. You tried to turn me into a symbol, a stepping stone. He tried to speak but couldn't. I stood. I'm not releasing it, I said. Not unless you keep pushing. What do you want in return? Silence, I said. No press statements. No attempts to salvage the narrative. No sabotage. You disappear from my story, gracefully. He stared at the USB like it was a grenade. And if I don't? I looked at my attorney, then back at him. Then Exhibit A becomes Exhibit Public. I turned to leave. Just before the door closed behind me, I heard him whisper, You used to love me. I didn't turn. You used to matter. The boardroom felt like an interrogation room. Too white. Too sterile. Too quiet. Andrew hadn't spoken for a full minute since I dropped the USB drive onto the polished table and gave him my ultimatum. Finally, he pushed his chair back, leaned on his elbows, and let out a strained breath. Madeline, he said slowly, you don't have to do this. I didn't move. Didn't answer. Just watched him. His campaign-perfect mask was cracking now. No lights, no cameras, no carefully curated sound bites. The sharp jawline sagged a little. His voice lacked conviction. I know I messed up, he said. I made a mistake. But we were something real once, weren't we? It would have been more convincing if his eyes didn't keep darting toward the USB like it might sprout legs and explode. I want to fix this. I let out a short laugh. Yow. He sat back, wounded. I panicked. The campaign was slipping. The numbers weren't trending. I leaned on Sienna because she was there. My lawyer shifted beside me but said nothing. I didn't mean for it to go that far. The kiss, the headlines, none of it was supposed to happen like that. You kissed her, I said, voice flat. Once. Madeline, it didn't mean anything. No, I said coolly. What meant something was the press release your team sent out the next morning saying I was mentally unfit. That meant something. He winced. Sienna helped with that, didn't she? I asked. Who came up with that genius phrase? Emotional fatigue due to wedding pressure? Andrew sighed. It wasn't about you. It was damage control. My donors needed a reason. And I was the convenient one. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. I never wanted to hurt you. It just got out of hand. Don't flatter yourself, I said. You never had that kind of control. He flinched. You weren't just my fiancé, Andrew. I leaned forward, each word precise. You were my project. He froze. I edited your speeches. I buried your family's tax skeletons. I prepped you for every debate, every appearance. I read your opposition research before your team did. I never asked you to. You didn't have to, I cut in. Because you knew I would. Because you knew I believed in you. I still want this, he said suddenly. But I want us back. I blinked. You're not serious. His expression hardened with desperate sincerity. Let's call off the war. Let's forget the noise. We get married quietly, no press, just us. Sienna can go back to the campaign office. She'll understand. She'll understand? He nodded. It's not what you think. She's not important. You are. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something had shifted. He didn't want me back. He wanted his optics back. His image rebuilt. His campaign salvaged. His future reattached to my name. Andrew Pierce didn't love me. He loved what I gave him. And that was gone. He reached into a slim leather folio beside him and pulled out a document. I had this drafted this morning. And If you sign, the USB never gets released. We each walk away quietly. No lawsuits, no exposés. Just peace. He slid it across the table toward me. I didn't even glance at it. Tell me something, I said. When was the last time you wrote a speech? He frowned. I don't remember. Exactly. Because I wrote every one of them. That's not fair. I chose your ties. I picked the charities. I scripted the apology when your brother's DUI came out. I booked the press junkets. I paid for half your staff. He was silent. I did the heavy lifting, Andrew. All you had to do was smile and show up. He looked like he wanted to argue. But he couldn't. Because he knew. You thought I'd stay quiet, I continued. Because I'm calm. Because I'm polished. Because I don't shout. He nodded faintly. But you forgot something crucial, I said, pushing the ND back across the table. I own words. I bend them. Shape them. Print them. He didn't answer. You had one clause to follow. Just one. He swallowed. Mutual respect. And you broke it. I stood. Andrew's gaze jumped from the USB to the NDA to me, like he still couldn't understand how quickly he had lost. Do you really want to do this? He asked. I looked him straight in the eye. I'm not doing anything. You already did. Then I turned and walked out. My heels clicked down the corridor like punctuation marks on his silence. When the door closed behind me, I finally let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Christian was waiting in the car. I slid into the passenger seat, handed him the NDA and said, didn't sign it. He flipped it open, smirked and said, he really thought you'd agree to this? He thinks strategy is charm wrapped in apology. He arched a brow. And what do you think it is? Proof. Christian started the engine. Where to? Home. That night I sat at my desk with a glass of red wine and pulled open the USB folder. The contents stared back at me, scanned financials, transcripts, photos, audio clips. All carefully time-stamped. All damning. I could destroy him in 5 clicks. But I didn't. Because revenge wasn't about the explosion. It was about the silence afterward. In the morning, an email arrived from one of Andrew's ex-donors. Ms. Cole, I regret the circumstances, but I respect your handling of the matter. If you ever choose to host a new initiative in the education space, we would be honored to support you directly. Whitman Family Foundation. The subject line? Reallocation of funding. Meanwhile, Sienna had begun disappearing from campaign photos. The optics had changed. The public, once forgiving of her proximity to power, now saw her as the reason Andrew lost it. The girl who brought him down. The face behind the fracture. And Andrew? He stopped calling. But the silence felt less like absence, and more like surrender. 3 days later, Christian knocked on my office door. Busy? He asked. Always. He smiled. Can I show you something? He placed a first edition copy of Julius Caesar on my desk. Read the underlined quote. I flipped it open. Et tu, Brute? I raised a brow. You're comparing me to Brutus? No, Christian said, stepping closer. I'm saying Caesar trusted the wrong people. And I'm supposed to trust you? You already did, he said, the moment you didn't release that USB. He was right. There's power in restraint. And I was done giving Andrew the luxury of my anger. He took everything I built and thought he could reshape it into his campaign. But what he never understood was that I was never just the woman beside the throne. I was the architect. Now I was rebuilding the palace. Without him. It started with a whisper in a corner of the internet. A post on an obscure political forum, mostly frequented by policy nerds and deep dive researchers, titled, Andrew Pierce's PAC funds don't add up. No one paid attention at first. Just another anonymous user hidden behind a screen name, making claims about numbers not aligning between public filings and internal expenditure reports. Then came the screenshots. Scan memos with official headers. Wire transfer logs time-stamped within days of Sienna Lowe's private travel bookings. Unreported donations from shell corporations connected to lobbying firms with notoriously murky ethics. And finally, the text messages. Between Andrew and Sienna. Dozens of them. Some benign, most strategic, but a few damning. Sienna. Relax, Drew. I already told the PAC director to move the consulting fees under media outreach. It'll bury itself. Andrew. Just make sure the Cole girl never sees it. Within 12 hours the post exploded. It had migrated from forums to X, formerly Twitter, then TikTok, then Reddit, where a full Piercegate thread was pinned to the top of the political scandals subreddit. By noon, #Pierce cover-up was trending globally. Andrew's team scrambled to respond. A press conference was announced for the following morning, held in the rotunda of the campaign headquarters, flanked by the 2 American flags they always wheeled out for serious moments. I watched the livestream from my penthouse, coffee in hand, robe tied loose. Andrew walked onto the stage in a crisp blue suit that no longer carried any gravity. His eyes looked bloodshot, jaw clenched too tight. The charm was still there, but it was tired. Cornered. He stood at the podium and began. Let me start by saying the recent allegations surfacing online are completely baseless. The speech continued for 8 minutes. He blamed the digital misinformation machine. He blamed malicious actors. He blamed disgruntled associates with personal vendettas. But not once did he mention Sienna. Not by name. Not even by implication. That was the press's job now. Within the hour, clips of him denying involvement played side by side with the leaked texts. Major networks dissected every phrase, every furrow of his brow. Even the normally supportive outlets began to shift tone. Andrew Pierce fumbles response to leaks. Avoids naming key advisor. Public trust in Pierce campaign cracks under evidence avalanche. Where is Sienna Lowe? No one could find her. Until someone did. A blurry photo surfaced on a gossip site, taken just after sunrise. Sienna, in leggings and a hoodie, loading boxes into the trunk of a black SUV in the private garage below Andrew's downtown condo. Caption read. Looks like someone's skipping the morning meeting. My phone buzzed. Melissa, my ever-efficient assistant, sent me a message. Publicist from The Atlantic called. They're updating their Power Couples feature and want to replace the Pierce duo with you and Christian. Want me to approve? I typed back. No interviews. But let them run the photo from the Vanguard Awards. 5 minutes later, a draft headline landed in my inbox. The publisher and the partner, Cole and Vale's quiet storm. Perfect. That afternoon, Christian returned from a board meeting and dropped a copy of the New York Sentinel on my desk. The front page showed Andrew mid-press conference, mouth open like he'd just choked on his own lie. The headline beneath it was scathing. Too many secrets, too few answers. I flipped it aside and returned to my notes. Christian crossed his arms and asked, Still not going to speak publicly? No. Even now. I looked up at him. Especially now. He nodded. Then I'll say something. I raised an eyebrow. Since when do you talk to the press? He gave a small shrug. Since they started knocking on our side of the door. The next day, Christian made a rare appearance in the Cole and Eastman marble-floored press chamber. There were no pre-written remarks. No flashy graphics. Just him standing at a plain podium with the company logo behind him. He wore no tie. Just a crisp white shirt and that same calm, coiled composure he always carried. I won't speak long, he began, voice firm and measured. We've all seen the headlines. We've read the reports. We know the storm that's gathering. Pause. I won't be addressing Andrew Pierce's behavior. Not because I have nothing to say, but because it says enough on its own. A hush swept the room. What I will say is this: how we lead matters. Not just in boardrooms or ballots, but at home. The principles we build our lives on, transparency, loyalty, truth, shouldn't disappear when the cameras are off. He looked straight into the sea of flashing lights. That's how we run our companies. And our homes. Then he stepped down. By the time he returned to my office, clips of the speech had already gone viral. One commentator on X wrote, Christian Vale is the man Andrew Pierce pretended to be. Another posted, now this is how you support a woman with power. And yet another, if he writes speeches like he gives them, someone tell Madeline Cole she won the damn lottery. I closed my laptop and smirked. You're officially internet famous, I said. Christian rolled his eyes. Remind me to delete everything. That night a package arrived at my door. A thick envelope. No return address. Inside, a handwritten letter. From Sienna Lowe. The handwriting was sharp, slanted, pressed into the paper like the writer was forcing herself to stay steady. Madeline, I don't know if you'll read this, but I'm writing it anyway. You were never the villain. I just didn't want to be the footnote in someone else's success story anymore. But I chose the wrong narrative. He told me you were cold. Calculating. Pooh. He lied. I see that now. They've locked me out of everything. The campaign. The donors. Even the apartment key doesn't work. I guess that's the price of being a placeholder. Take care of yourself. You're better than him. So. I folded the letter neatly and tucked it into a drawer. Next to the USB. The next morning I stepped into the elevator at the Cole building. A young intern looked up from her tablet and whispered, "I really admire you, Miss Cole." I glanced at her, surprised. "Why?" She smiled nervously. "You didn't say a word. And still, you won." The elevator dinged and I stepped out. Oh. Not one. Reclaimed. Rain the day he finally broke. A soft, steady drizzle that turned the city into a blur of reflections. The kind of weather that made everything feel cinematic. If you were a romantic. Andrew Pierce was not. But he was persistent. Especially when things slipped through his fingers. He had gone silent for weeks after the press conference. Vanishing from media, campaign events, even donor meetings. Then without warning he started trying to revive the wedding. It began with subtle calls to vendors. An attempt to restore the original venue. Emails flagged urgent, to florists and string quartets. All of them were denied. The Cole family estate had long been reserved for the ceremony. It was a 19th-century mansion nestled beyond a wrought iron gate, surrounded by old oaks and silence. The place had belonged to my grandfather, and the moment I had agreed to marry Andrew, my father had offered it as a gift. He was now trying to reclaim it. The estate's private events manager, Sheila, called me directly. "Miss Cole," she said, voice tight. "Mr. Pierce's assistant just contacted me to reconfirm the wedding schedule. They're under the impression the venue is still active." I took a breath. "It's not." "I know that. I told them. But they're insistent." "I'll handle it." I hung up and stared out the window for a long time. What was it like, I wondered, to believe you could return to something you'd already destroyed? The next morning he showed up in person. It was 8:42 a.m. The gate intercom buzzed twice before Sheila picked up and alerted me. "It's him," she said. I descended the staircase slowly in no rush. Outside, through the rain-speckled windows, I could see his figure just beyond the gate. No umbrella. No plan. Just desperation. Christian arrived seconds later, adjusting his tie, unbothered by the chaos. "He's here," I said simply. I assumed he would be. Christian stepped outside and walked to the gate alone. I stayed at the window and watched. Andrew's voice was rising. "Where's Madeline?" "She's still inside, isn't she?" Christian stood calmly in front of the locked gate, hands in his pockets. "She doesn't want to see you." Andrew scoffed. "This was our wedding venue. I have a right to." "You forfeited that right. She said we'd marry here." "I picked the oak tree spot myself." Christian tilted his head. "The registry changed. You're not on the list." Andrew laughed bitterly. "You think this is over? That I'll just walk away?" "No," Christian said evenly. "I think you'll finally realize she already did." The gate didn't open. Andrew shouted something unintelligible. Christian turned and walked back toward the house. Inside, I climbed the stairs and walked the long hallway toward the study. The air was quiet, only the soft sound of classical piano from the sitting room speakers humming through the space. On the wall beside the arched window hung an old photo. Andrew and me at the Hudson Gala 2 years ago. He was smiling, I was mid-laugh, and for a while I had believed in it. In him. I stared at it for 3 seconds. Then wordlessly I reached up, unhooked the frame and removed the photograph. The spot on the wall looked cleaner without it. In my room, the velvet box sat untouched on the dresser. Christian had given it to me quietly, with no fanfare, no audience. No contract. Just the question, "Will you stay?" And my answer, "I already did." I opened the box now, letting the light catch on the ring. It was simple. No oversized diamond. No ceremonial flourish. Just a smooth platinum band with a single oval sapphire, cool, calm, and sure. Like him. Like me now. Meanwhile, outside, Andrew was unraveling. Security was called, not by me but by the estate staff. His shouting had risen in pitch, his fists pounding the locked gate. Sheila came to find me again. He's threatening to contact the press. Let him, I said. You're sure? He came to a house he no longer belongs to. The optics speak for themselves. Sheila hesitated. And Mr. Vale? I smiled faintly. He already handled it. Later that evening I found Christian in the library, scanning a volume of law essays with a glass of scotch in hand. You're still here, I said. Is that a problem? I shook my head. It's a relief. He raised an eyebrow. He'll come back. You know that, right? I do. He still thinks this is a chapter that hasn't ended. But it has. Christian sipped his drink. You were always the stronger one. No, I said. I just learned faster. That night after dinner I stepped out into the courtyard. The rain had stopped. The stars peeked through the clouds. I walked barefoot on the stone path, breathing in the calm. No cameras. No headlines. Just silence. And the knowledge that somewhere Andrew was wondering how it all slipped through his fingers. He never realized I was never the crown. I was the one who gave it meaning. And I had taken it back. It was supposed to be a quiet evening. The Alcott Foundation Charity Gala was one of the last few formal events of the season. Less press, more philanthropy. I was attending as a donor and guest speaker, not a symbol. For once I didn't plan to dominate the room, I just wanted to breathe in it. The ballroom glowed in soft gold. Tables were lined with pale roses, and the air smelled faintly of champagne and understated money. Christian and I arrived together but in separate cars. It was a small concession to the public image machine. We hadn't confirmed anything official since the gala kiss. Let the world guess. I wore silver that night. Clean lines. A modest slit. My hair tied in a low no-nonsense knot. I had just stepped off stage after giving a short, elegant speech on literacy and community publishing when I saw her. Sienna. She stood near the back of the room, too close to the bar, her posture rigid with something between defiance and panic. Her gown was dark burgundy. Too dramatic for this event. Her heels too high. Her expression calculated. I recognized the look instantly. It was the look of someone with nothing left to lose. I turned to return to my table. She cut across the floor straight toward me. A few heads turned. Madeline, she called loud enough for the room to hush. I stopped. She stood 3 feet away, eyes glittering, smile venom-sweet. I just wanted to say, congratulations. Her voice dripped sarcasm. You really won. Didn't you? I didn't answer. You must be so proud, she continued louder now. Ruining Andrew. Breaking up a family. Turning Christian against his own blood. So I said nothing. People were watching. Listening. The string quartet faltered. Sienna's tone sharpened. Funny how fast you traded up, considering you were planning to marry Andrew 2 weeks ago. Guess love isn't as important to you as revenge. I took a step forward. I didn't trade up, I said, cool and measured. I just stopped settling down. A soft gasp rippled from a nearby table. Sienna's jaw tightened. He kissed me once. Once. You burned him to the ground over it. Are you really that petty? Christian's voice cut through the silence. No. He emerged from the shadows near the bar, his expression unreadable, eyes locked on Sienna. She's not petty, he said. She's principled. He came to stand beside me, slipping his hand into mine, steady and warm. She's the reason our family still stands, he said calmly. And the reason yours is falling apart. Sienna's breath hitched. Christian nodded to the nearest staff member. Get security. She started to protest. Loud, desperate, but it was too late. 2 suited guards approached gently, offering her a discreet exit. She didn't fight. She just turned toward me one last time. You're not better than me, she hissed under her breath. You're just quieter. I smiled faintly. And still louder than you'll ever be. By the time the gala resumed, Sienna Lowe had become a whisper in someone else's conversation. The violinists resumed. Christian led me back to our table, offering me a quiet toast with the corner of his glass. You didn't need to do that, I said softly. I know. But thank you. He took a sip then set his glass down. I've been meaning to ask you something, he said. I raised an eyebrow. He leaned closer, his voice low but firm. Would you still marry me, even without the revenge? The question stunned me more than I expected. Because he meant it. Not just the words. The truth behind them. I stared at him for a long second. I would, I said quietly. That's why I'm saying yes. He didn't smile right away. He just nodded like something deep inside him finally settled. And then for the first time that night I saw him soften. Completely. The next morning a letter arrived at my door. Cream-colored envelope. No return address. Just my name in sharp cursive black ink. Inside was a single sheet. From Sienna. Madeline. I was never supposed to win. I see that now. I wasn't ready for someone like Andrew. And he wasn't built to survive someone like you. You didn't destroy him. He did. But I helped. The pregnancy I lied. I wanted to make him stay. To make you retreat. It didn't work. It was never going to. You're not a villain. You're just the kind of woman I never learned how to be. I'm sorry. Sol. I read the letter once. Then folded it carefully and slid it into the drawer next to the others. I didn't feel satisfaction. Or pity. Only finality. That evening, Christian found me in the garden behind the estate. Busy, he asked. I shook my head. Just thinking. He walked to me, took my hand and looked toward the horizon. Do you still want the villa? He asked. Or City Hall? Neither. Oh. I turned toward him. I want Paris. He smiled. Then we'll go to Paris. The collapse didn't come with a bang. Came quietly, like a house eaten from the inside by termites, until one day the foundation simply gave out. Andrew Pierce's campaign fell apart in the same slow, humiliating fashion. The final blow came not from a rival, not from an ex, not even from a viral scandal. It came from the Office of Ethics Review, which had finally concluded its month-long investigation. Their press release was one sentence long. Due to confirmed financial misconduct and documented coordination with prohibited donor entities, Mr. Andrew Pierce is hereby disqualified from continuing his candidacy. The headlines wrote themselves. Pierce disqualified after ethics probe. Career crashes after leaked evidence. From rising star to falling embers. The end of Andrew Pierce's campaign. Sienna Lowe disappears following scandal fallout. Andrew issued no statement. He simply vanished. 3 weeks later I married Christian Vale. It wasn't a grand cathedral or a ballroom spectacle. We chose a restored literary estate nestled in the countryside. A historic property once owned by a 20th-century novelist known for her famously unsentimental view on love. It felt appropriate. The wedding was private. Just 60 guests. No press allowed inside, though drones tried to hover past the garden hedge until security politely swatted them away. The theme was soft academia, velvet-bound menus, books as centerpieces, candlelit aisles lined with first editions instead of flowers. I walked down that aisle to a string quartet playing Claire de Lune, not because it was romantic, but because it reminded me that stories change with perspective. When I reached Christian, he didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me like he'd known me long before we ever met. We exchanged vows surrounded by shelves of literature and people who understood what it meant to rebuild something meaningful, slowly, deliberately, and without apology. The media had no images from inside. But they had plenty from the entrance. Christian stepping from the car in a custom-cut midnight tuxedo. Me in a sleek off-white dress with no train, no veil, just a single ink-dipped quill tattooed across my left wrist. And homage to the pen that had built everything. By the following morning the press had crowned us. The minds that ruled the boardroom and the ballroom. Even Forbes ran a cover story on our merger, both literal and strategic. When power marries precision. Inside the Coalvale Alliance. Somewhere far away in a hotel bar overlooking the edge of nowhere, Andrew Pierce watched the livestream footage alone. It wasn't official. It had leaked via a distant cousin's tagged Instagram story. But there he sat, whiskey untouched, lips tight as he stared at the screen of his phone. Madeline Cole was getting married. And not to him. He hadn't spoken to anyone in days. Not since the probe results were released. Not since Sienna disappeared from his apartment and took the final scrap of illusion with her. His phone had rung a dozen times since the wedding footage began. Calls from his mother, his PR firm, a few desperate media outlets hoping for a quote. He didn't answer any of them. Instead he pulled open the drawer of the desk in his hotel room and retrieved a folder he hadn't touched since the beginning of it all. Inside, the engagement contract. Pages yellowed slightly at the edges, creased from the way he'd stuffed them in too tightly. Clause 1. Clause 17. Clause 26. And finally, the last clause. Clause 31. If the groom through action or negligence violates any core tenet of this agreement, particularly mutual respect or fidelity, he forfeits all claims to assets, name affiliations and binding rights as per this engagement. Final authority lies with the injured party. He stared at it for a long time. Then laughed. It wasn't joyful. It was bitter. Choked. Ugly. He had forgotten that clause. Madeline hadn't. Back at the estate, the reception was winding down. Guests lingered in the library, sipping from glasses etched with literary quotes. A jazz band played a quiet rendition of Blue in Green in the conservatory. I stood near the fireplace with Christian, our fingers laced together. Someone tapped their glass with a spoon. I turned. My father. He smiled. Forgive me, he said, but I must say something. The room hushed. I have watched my daughter lead empires, he began. I have watched her walk away from betrayal with dignity. But today I saw her begin something new, not built from vengeance but from vision. He raised his glass toward Christian. And I have watched this man, quiet, exacting and painfully honorable, stand beside her not because he needed her light, but because he saw it and chose to protect it. A soft applause followed. I glanced at Christian. He looked stunned. Almost shy. I whispered, that's the closest thing to a love letter my father will ever write. Christian smiled. I'll take it. Later that night, once the final guest had left, we returned to the private study at the far wing of the estate. There were no gifts waiting. No fireworks. Just us. And quiet. Tao what? I asked. Christian tilted his head. You tell me. I thought for a moment. I think I want to start something new. A book. No, I said, eyes narrowing. A press. Small. Independent. Focused on voices like mine. Women who built, broke and rebuilt. Christian nodded. And the name? I smiled. Clause 31. Paris smelled like fresh croissants and rain-washed stone. We landed on a quiet Thursday morning, the kind of day that wrapped you gently instead of announcing itself. The city had woken slowly, letting the cobblestones dry, letting the sky flirt with blue. Christian insisted on no itinerary. No schedules, he said, tossing his phone onto the hotel bed. No suits. No urgent anything. Just pastries and walks? I teased. And kissing you in front of the Eiffel Tower like a shameless tourist. I laughed. You. Mr. Executive reserve emotion. Even executives fall hard sometimes. We rented a penthouse suite in a building that overlooked the Seine. The balcony was narrow but the view was endless. At night, the lights danced on the water and made me forget the word scandal had ever existed. Our days blurred into one another in the best way. We wandered Montmartre with ice cream cones, debated books in quaint cafes, bought vintage postcards we never intended to send. One afternoon Christian bought me a scarf. Hand-painted. A deep indigo, the color of the sky just before midnight. For when you miss home, he said. You are home, I replied. He never said thank you for staying. I never needed him to. But he did say other things. Do you want a dog? We should get a dog. Let's never leave. Let's grow old here. Let's bicker about bread and watch the river turn silver in winter. And one night, wrapped in linen sheets and half drunk on wine, you make silence feel like a story. We hosted our own little dinner for two every night. One night he cooked. Burned the risotto. We ordered pizza instead. Another night I tried to impress him with a complicated French dish and nearly set off the smoke alarm. Emergency marriage test, I joked as we opened all the windows. Passed, he grinned, waving a towel at the ceiling. Still hopelessly in love with you even if you're a culinary assassin. We ate charred chicken on the balcony that night and laughed until we cried. A week into the honeymoon he handed me a notebook. Hardcover, black with a ribbon bookmark. I thought you might want to write it down, he said. What? This. The next part. The part that's soft. I flipped to the first page. He had already started the dedication. For the girl who turned a contract into a compass. A war into a home. A scar into a signature. I closed the notebook and kissed him. Write more, I whispered. Live more, he replied. One rainy day we stayed in. played cards, danced barefoot to old jazz, tried and failed to make French toast in a pan far too small. He wore my robe. I wore his shirt. It felt perfectly backward. We sprawled across the floor, surrounded by half-folded travel books and a still warm blanket. "Remember your wedding clause?" he murmured. "Which one?" "The one where the groom forfeits everything if he betrays the bride." I turned my head toward him. "You never broke it," I said. "I never will." I smiled. "Then you keep everything." At sunset he surprised me with a lock. A small, golden padlock engraved with our initials. We walked to Pont d'Arts, found a spot on the bridge and clicked it shut. He threw the key into the Seine. "So no one can undo us," he said. "Not even you?" He raised a brow. "Especially not me." Back at the hotel I finally opened the email from my assistant. The press was live. My new publishing house. Clause 31. The homepage displayed a single tagline. "Stories from women who left and lived." The first manuscript in our pipeline? A collection of essays titled The Fiancé Clause. Not written in rage but reflection. Not about Andrew, but about who I became once I stopped being his anything. Christian came up behind me, kissed the side of my neck. "Is it live?" he asked. "It is." He leaned over my shoulder and read the tagline. Then whispered, "You're magic, you know that?" "I'm stubborn." "That too. And brilliant. And impossible not to love." I turned in his arms. "Good," I said. "Because I'm not going anywhere." He kissed me like we had forever. As we did. And in a quiet handwritten note taped to the inside of my notebook, I wrote the final words. To love. To laughter. To the version of me who never had to fight to be chosen. Because she chose herself first. And someone chose her right after. The end.